Alright, so let's take a look here. So the first place that I'd start is with the route. So let's go there. Okay, so in the routes, basically like using standard resources or resources that's nested just one level down is generally the way to go. So here we have 3 levels of nestings. That's generally a code smell. It just makes things complicated as you go through. Especially if like this is the way that you create restaurants, is only if you also have a user and then you have a review and then you have a restaurant, right? It probably explains why down here you do it a different way. So unless your code really requires it, to me it's probably like a restaurant has many reviews, and it isn't even associated with the user. So something like this would make sense, right? Because then this would have, like, as an example, like /restaurants, the number of the restaurant, like that's the first one, and then all the reviews for that restaurant. So this I would probably delete unless you really have code that's dependent on it. As for this here you have likes and dislikes, right? And then you have undislike and unlike. If you notice, right, this is really taking the same standard like RESTful design of like, here's a set of likes, and we're going to both, sorry about that, we're going to both like create them and destroy them. And then you're doing the same thing with dislikes. So what I would do is maybe, and this is not a huge deal, but to make it more RESTful, you can just have 2 resources, one for likes and one for dislikes. And then an unlike is just destroying a like, right? And an undislike is destroying a dislike. So that seems to make sense. From here, we'll go to the models. So just looking at the routes, the main thing that I can see is that users, reviews, restaurants, those are probably going to be the most important resources. When I go here in the models, user, review, restaurant, I'm not sure. I don't understand this reviews user, because this implies like a many-to-many relationship, where if I have a review does not belong to many restaurants, right? And does not belong to many users. It just belongs to a single one, right? So I'm gonna have so I just don't see this here. I would think that I have a review belongs to is probably a user and a restaurant. So when I go here, that's actually what we see, which is good. But it begs the question of why we need this. Then we go to user, same thing, has many reviews, that makes sense. And then let's take a look at restaurant. Cool. And we make sure that there's unique name and has many reviews. Okay, so that makes sense. One thing that we notice here, right, is like there's not a lot of there's really not any custom code when we get to the models. Sometimes that's an okay thing, but you want to make sure that there's code somewhere, right, in your code base. And this is something that I oftentimes am telling beginners is just, all right, show me more code. One easy way to have methods in your models is just query methods. So like if you think of like a dashboard, thinking of like the restaurant that has like the most popular restaurant would be an example, or a user that reviews the most, right, or is the most positive reviewer, things like that. Or you can have things like certain logic, like making sure that a user doesn't review a restaurant more than once, right? That's another way to just adding logic to your code base. So the next thing is see, okay, are there any jobs? It doesn't look like it, right? Are there any mailers? No. Okay, so let's go then to the controller. So we're just working our way from the bottom up. And the most important one, user controller generally is pretty typical. Here, I would probably replace this with root path. Okay, and then do the same thing here. All right, and otherwise looks okay. If we go, okay, before action, make sure the user's logged in. That's good, right? Except on index, where they get to just actually view some reviews. Both of these make sense, and that's good. Otherwise, it's pretty standard, right, in terms of Rails controller. So let's move on. We'll take a look at the restaurants controller. Here, this is not as standard, right? Because especially we're making this call to the API. For something like this, we should really move this into its own class, and you can look up the adapter pattern to do something like that. So you can see this blog post. What we do, you can see that we start off here, also calling the API directly from the controller, okay? And then instead what happens is we move all that code into this other class, app adapters. So we make a folder called adapters, and then you can make this adapter.rb that has these classes in there. And then you literally like copy and paste the code. Like that's more or less what it is, but you can read through this. So we want to get that logic out of our controller, and the main reason is because there's a couple reasons. All right, one is we may want to hit the API under different circumstances, right? Like it's not necessarily when I navigate to a page that we want to hit the API, but it could be like we want to gather all these restaurants anyway, and do that. And then the other thing is we don't necessarily want to hit an API every time. Every time we go to this index page. Instead, it would be good to do like find or create, right? That would be better. And then it also just makes this, it's organizing your code, right? It's wrapping it in a method so that this doesn't get very long. It's also easier to test if we move this out of the controller. Cool. I do like the fact that this is, we're using an environment. We're not having the API key directly in here. That's nice. Okay, and then the other thing you can see is when we call this restaurant save data. So this is probably, this part here is tied to this part here. So both of these could go into a separate, a single class. That's not this. Then we call restaurant save data. We pass through information about the restaurant. Probably don't want the comment. And then we initialize new restaurant. Here you don't, unless you're displaying this, you don't need an instance variable here, right? And then, so if restaurant.save, then print saved. This is really just for the developer, so you don't want to do something like this. You want to either like log the result, or somehow store, like if there was an error, right, to indicate that. Alright, so that's it for the controller. So you can see that there were a few changes we want. We want the adapter pattern. You want to have some logic so that you don't hit the API every time you go to the index page, and you want to clean up this logging. Cool. So as for the views now, so we're working our way from the bottom up. Assets, controllers, views. So we'll take a look here. So here you can see right away, right, that there's a good amount of repetition here. So really, like, probably what we do instead is do something like, take these reviews here and say, excellent, good, average. Let's just stick with them for now. Dot each, and because we need, we could do something like each with index, and like start at, we could even start at 0, and then do review, and then we could put this here, right? And for this, we could say the number is like 5 minus do review comma index. And maybe there's a better way to do this, but review comma index, we could do like 5 minus index. So index is 0 the first time, but then it's going to go down to 1, and then same thing here. Alright. And then here, right, we would replace excellent with the name of the review, or like whatever we're going to call that, the rating probably. Alright, something like that, and we'll call this rating. Okay, so this is, a way to refactor, and then we want to end it. And we'll do, so you would do something similar here, right, and here, and here. All right, and then here, same thing. Like, there's a lot of repetition here. We can see we're getting the element by ID 1, and then on click, I guess we're adding an event listener when it's true. So we could do this just by finding all these elements and then adding the same event listener. Right? We don't need that repetition there. So here, right, you just notice that there's a lot of repetition. So probably, pretty sure this can be cleaned up.